Jacinda Ardern.
Mr Speaker, I want to acknowledge up front that as long as I can remember, and before I even was a member of this House, New Zealand has been very poor at having fair and reasonable and rational discussions about our benefit system. Too quickly we tend to descend into stereotypes, wedge politics, discussions that can be interpreted as being no more than categorising the worthy and unworthy poor. And all of those debates, I have to say, I feel are to the detriment of all of us, but in particular to the children who often live in the families of those who are dependent on the state in some form. And I'm saddened to say that in lots of ways I don't think we've improved if this debate has been anything to go by. And I've heard a lot of generalisations and assumptions during this debate. But I want to start from a principle that was mentioned by one of my colleagues, the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta. And it's this simple premise: Kiwis want to work. And stemming from that premise comes lots of obligations that we therefore have as both opposition and as members of the government on the other side of the House. And if this bill was genuinely about getting Kiwis into work, which we on this side of the House believe all Kiwis wish to, then it is our job to do three things. Make sure we do all we can to use the levers of the state that we have to create real, sustainable jobs. Now that means doing all that we can, whether it be working with business, whether it be looking at our monetary policy, absolutely everything we can to create jobs. And I have not seen enough of that on the other side of the House. The second duty we have is to make sure Kiwis have the right skills for those jobs. And that's why Labour, when we were in government, looked very closely at creating a comprehensive skills strategy to make sure that we were meeting the demands of the business sector and of the new emerging economy. And also making sure that we had invested in those areas that were providing skills training for our Kiwis, particularly those who were leaving skilled without the necessary education and background to get into work in the first place. So that's our second duty. And our third duty, and this is one that I think probably only this side of the House takes especially seriously, and that's making sure that once people are in jobs, making sure they have some basic rights while they're there. But I perhaps digress. Nothing in this bill that I've seen focuses on those three elements, those three premises, those three criteria that we should be focusing if we all do believe that Kiwis want to work. But I want to reflect on the context in which this bill now finds itself. And we have, of course, new information before us that tells us where unemployment is at in New Zealand. And I think it's indicative of the fact that we've got the wrong focus with this bill. Unemployment is up to 6.8%. We've heard discussion around that. But I want to focus in particular on the fact that youth unemployment continues to grow. We've seen a slight decline of 0.5% for 15 to 19-year-olds, and I'd like to point that out in particular for Sir Roger Douglas, who still seems hell-bent on the fact that these young people, he believes, are not getting into work because of how much they're paid. I don't believe that's true. But for 20 to 24-year-olds, the situation is much worse. Numbers since the last quarterly survey have gone up by 2.6% since March. It now sits at 13.7%. That is a total of 68,200 young people not in work. And the number not in educational training either is higher. Now, the government claims it has a plan, and apparently this bill forms some part of it. And I'll go on to have a little bit of a discussion of how I don't feel that that is the case. But it also claimed that the job ops package was going to assist with some of those escalating numbers. But there are three problems with that package as it stands, and it does relate to this bill to some degree. The jobs ops package for young people, the initiatives tended to focus primarily on young people who are already on a benefit. Now, we know that anyone who's under the age of 18, by and large it did. That was how it identified the young people it needed to work with. It's an easy criteria to use. That's how the government has interaction with young people not in work. Perfectly understandable. But if you're under 18 years of age and you're not in education and you're not in employment and you're not accessing a benefit because you're not eligible, there is very little opportunity for you to find those young people. And these initiatives were crafted primarily for the ones that are easy to find. And that's an area we need to work harder on. Also, unfortunately, anecdotally, I've heard evidence of the fact that young people are being turned away more and more from the unemployment benefit, some being told they're unable to access it unless they go on a limited service volunteer course, often far away from their home. Instead, they're staying where they are, not accessing any support and still struggling to find work. And recently I heard from the City Mission that they're seeing an increasing number of young men in the under 24 age bracket who are not on benefits but do not have work and are seeking food parcels in the Auckland City area. And we also need to keep in mind that that whole package that the government produced was meant to be targeted at those who the government considered to be unskilled. Now, one challenge I wish to throw to the government is if you identify a young person in particular who is unskilled, what are you doing to upskill them? Simply putting them into work, and we've seen some demonstration of this through the jobs up package of people who have been unable to stay in those jobs, who have been released at the end, and there's not enough survey work telling us why that is, but I would wager it's because they never had the skills for the job in the first place, and that's what this bill would have been much better off if we were replacing this bill with something that focused on that. I do want to go through the main provisions of the bill and just touch on some of the individual challenges that we've been posing against each of them. But I want the House to keep in mind that premise that I outlined at the beginning, that Kiwis want to work. And the first provision in the bill requires unemployment beneficiaries to reapply for their benefit every 12 months and undertake a comprehensive work assessment at that time. Again, I want to hark back to that fact. If you're unskilled when you go onto an unemployment benefit and your sole focus is continually work testing them and testing that they're trying to get into a job, where is the focus on upskilling that individual to get them into work? Instead, we've seen the government cap numbers for tertiary education. So rather than assisting, they are in fact making it worse. A work assessment does nothing to upskill an individual. Second provision, introduce a part-time work test for solo parents on the DPB once the youngest child turns 6 years old. I think my colleague Rajan Prasad did a really good job of outlining some of the challenges on that, as have some of my other colleagues. I don't feel the need to traverse that one again. Thirdly, introduce a part-time work test for the people on the sickness benefit who are assessed as being able to work part-time. Now, this particular provision, I have to say, for me, did not sit with the reality of what any MP working out there in their electorate, whether they be list or constituency, will be seeing coming through their front door. Anyone worth their salt who is listening to those who are, in particular, on the invalids benefit right now and are facing the consistent threat of not only being moved onto the sickness benefit, but those on the sickness benefit who are being work tested, I'm seeing some extraordinary recommendations coming out of work and income. I've seen a woman with a fused wrist, unable to lift her hand without severe pain, being told in a work assessment that she should stack shelves for a job. That I have seen much worse than that as well. Individuals with severe brain injuries who they've had brain injuries for over 6 to 10 years in some cases I've seen, suddenly being told that somehow their situation has changed dramatically and being told that they should be working for an extraordinary number of hours. Some of the assessments I have seen go beyond what would be considered reasonable by any individual. And now we are entering into a phase where we already are seeing this happening. I wager we will see much, much worse as a result of this bill. And again, it flies in the face of the premise that Kiwis who are able to work want to work. These provisions do nothing to assist them into work. If these provisions are going to help create jobs, then I challenge the government to tell me how and how many. Because the fact remains, you can't sanction someone into a job that doesn't exist. People are losing their jobs because factories